Dakota Ashford grew up in a house where love was always in short supply. When her mother, Marlene, was still alive, she was the only wall standing between Dakota and her father's coldness. Marlene gently shielded her daughter, softening his sharp words and changing the subject whenever the atmosphere grew heavy. Because of her, Dakota could still feel a trace of warmth in their home, however fragile it was. But everything changed when Marlene passed away from ovarian cancer, when Dakota was just 10 years old. The doctors had given her 6 months, yet she fought bravely and lived 14 more just to have a little more time with her children. After the funeral, her father's mask fell away. His indifference was no longer hidden. Dakota slowly became a stranger in her own home. She wasn't beaten or yelled at, but she was forgotten, and that kind of neglect hurt more than any physical blow. Her younger brother, Tyler, was always the center of attention. He got new clothes, praise, and encouragement. Dakota wore donated outfits from the church and lived in the cold room above the garage, where the heater barely worked. Family dinners passed in silence, and Dakota sat there like an empty chair, present in body, but invisible in every other way. Her grandmother, Nana, was the only one who truly noticed Dakota's pain. Every time she came to visit, she would quietly slip a few bills into Dakota's jacket pocket and squeeze her hand tightly, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. There was always a trace of guilt and regret in her eyes, though at the time Dakota didn't understand why. She only knew that she grew up with a constant feeling of not belonging, always wondering why she wasn't loved the way her brother was. From a very young age, Dakota learned to stand on her own, to guard her heart, and to accept that in that house, she existed like an outsider. As Dakota entered her teenage years, the discrimination in her family was no longer a vague feeling, it became an undeniable reality. Her father no longer hid his coldness. In fact, he often said cruel things. He called her someone else's mistake, implying that Dakota was not his biological daughter. Each of those words felt like a knife carving into the fragile self-esteem of a 14 or 15-year-old girl. Dakota never dared to argue back. She swallowed her tears in silence, constantly asking herself what she had done wrong to deserve so little love. The difference in how she and Tyler were treated became painfully obvious. Tyler got a new bicycle, went to summer camp, and was driven to school every day by their father. Dakota, meanwhile, washed dishes after school to earn money for her textbooks and personal necessities. When she once asked for $40 to buy a used biology book, her father responded coldly, "Go ask your real father." The room fell silent. Tyler lowered his head, unable to look at his sister. Dakota bit her lip hard, fighting back tears so she wouldn't break down in front of them. She realized early on that she couldn't rely on anyone. From the age of 15, Dakota balanced school and work, coming home exhausted every night but still forcing herself to finish her homework. In that loneliness, she slowly built a tough outer shell, teaching herself to be independent and to expect nothing from anyone. Yet deep inside, the pain of having her identity and origins denied continued to burn quietly. It wasn't just about material deprivation, it was the feeling of being stripped of the right to be someone's daughter. That wound stretched across her entire childhood and followed her into adulthood. Dakota's 18th birthday had no big cake, no warm wishes, no celebration like other kids might have. After a draining shift washing dishes, she bought a box of funfetti cake mix for herself. She mixed it, baked it, and placed a single small candle in the center of the simple cake. Standing alone in the cold kitchen, she watched the flame flicker, silently wishing she could at least blow it out in her own home before being thrown out for good. At that very moment, her father walked in. He glanced at the cake, pulled a $50 bill from his wallet, and threw it straight at her face as if discarding something worthless. "Happy birthday. Get out of my house. I'm not paying for someone else's mistake anymore." His cold words echoed in the suffocating silence. Her grandmother sat in the living room, unable to rise. Tyler stood on the staircase, gripping the railing tightly, but he, too, couldn't say a single word. Dakota bent down, picked up the bill, folded it neatly, and slipped it into her back pocket. She blew out the candle, grabbed a trash bag stuffed with a few clothes, and walked out of that house for good. No tears, no begging. she quietly called Uncle Ray, the only person willing to open his arms to her. 40 minutes later, an old pickup truck pulled up outside. Dakota climbed in, leaving her shattered childhood behind her. That night, in the small room above Ray's auto repair shop, Dakota made a promise to herself. One day, the father who had cast her aside would understand exactly what he had lost. If you've ever been hurt, denied, or forced to leave a place that was supposed to be called home, leave a, quote, so one, you are not alone. Leaving behind the house that had imprisoned her childhood, Dakota stepped into independence with nothing but her 2 hands and a wounded heart. The tiny room above Ray's repair shop became her new world, cramped and simple, yet warmer than anywhere she had ever lived. Ray didn't ask for explanations or dig into her pain. He simply left hot meals outside her door, showed her how to handle small daily tasks, and patiently waited until Dakota was ready to open up on her own. Dakota balanced high school with a part-time job at a small Italian restaurant near home. The late-night dishwashing shifts left her hands cracked and raw, her back aching with exhaustion, but she never complained. She understood that education was her only way out. Even on nights when she felt completely drained, she forced herself to sit at her desk reading every page, solving every problem, writing careful notes because she knew that knowledge was the only path that could lead her out of the darkness. After graduating from high school, Dakota applied to nursing school. Her college years became a relentless cycle of lectures, hospital rotations, and part-time work. Some nights she fell asleep at her desk, waking up with dried tears on her cheeks. There were moments when she felt utterly depleted, as if she had nothing left to give. Still, she clenched her teeth and kept going, refusing to allow herself to collapse under the weight of it all. Ray became her quiet anchor. He saved every extra dollar from the repair shop to help cover her tuition whenever she fell short. There were no lectures, no grand gestures, just steady support, like a small light glowing through a long night. Through his quiet kindness, Dakota finally learned what real family truly meant. On the day Dakota graduated, she stood on the stage with tears shimmering in her eyes. In a crowded auditorium, only Ray clapped loudly for her, but to Dakota, it was the loudest applause of her life. In that moment, she knew she was no longer the abandoned little girl she once had been. She was a woman strong enough to rewrite her own destiny. 3 years after leaving home, just as Dakota was finally finding stability and focusing on completing her nursing program, an unexpected phone call shattered everything she thought she understood. The caller was Diane, her mother's closest friend. Her voice trembled as she explained that for years, Dakota's father had spread a story claiming Marlene had confessed to having an affair before she died. Diane firmly insisted it was a cruel lie. She had stayed by Marlene's side until her final breath and knew with certainty that Dakota's mother had never betrayed her husband. The call left Dakota stunned. For the first time, she stopped doubting her own identity and began questioning the character of the man who had rejected her. Diane revealed something else. During Marlene's pregnancy with Dakota, she had once suspected that Gary might have been involved with another woman. There was no proof, only the quiet intuition of a wife who felt betrayed. But to Dakota, the pieces slowly began to fall into place, forming a picture she had never dared to imagine. After a year of thinking it over, Dakota decided to seek the truth through science, a DNA test. During Thanksgiving, she returned to her childhood home at her brother's invitation. In the middle of the tense gathering, she quietly took the cup Gary had just used and submitted it for testing. A few weeks later, the results arrived. A 99.998% probability of paternity. Gary was her biological father. Dakota didn't cry out of relief, she cried out of anger. 22 years of denial, 22 years of quiet suffering, all of it rooted in a lie. She mailed the results to Gary, but he sent the envelope back unopened. That single act told Dakota everything. He wasn't afraid of the truth, he was afraid of facing himself. She placed the test results in a drawer and chose to move forward with her life, refusing to let a man who had rejected her define her worth any longer. 6 months before Gary's 60th birthday, Dakota received a call from a law office. Her grandmother, Nana, had passed away and left a private letter for Dakota with strict instructions that it be delivered only after her death. The news weighed heavily on Dakota's heart. Despite the family's coldness over the years, Nana had always cared for her in quiet ways. Yet she had also been the one person who never found the courage to stand up against the injustice Dakota endured. In the parking lot of the law office, Dakota opened the envelope. The shaky handwriting on the page cut straight into her heart. Nana confessed that she had known the whole truth for nearly 30 years. 6 months before Dakota was born, she had personally caught Gary having an affair with another woman. Instead of exposing him, she chose silence, afraid of losing her son, afraid the family would fall apart. That silence had pushed Dakota and her mother into years of pain with no escape. Nana wrote that Marlene had never been unfaithful. She had carried suspicion in her heart throughout her short life, suffering quietly and leaving this world with unresolved anguish. Nana apologized to Dakota, apologized for her cowardice, for allowing an innocent child to pay the price. The letter ended with a firm declaration. Dakota had always been her granddaughter, Gary's biological daughter, and living proof of a truth he had tried to deny. Dakota read the letter over and over in silence. For the first time, every doubt and every wound inside her had a name. No more confusion. No more lies. Only one bare truth remained. The person who needed to be cleared was not herself but her late mother. Gary's 60th birthday party was nothing short of extravagant, with nearly 80 guests in attendance. The backyard of the old house glowed with string lights, music filled the air, and laughter echoed across the lawn. It was a scene completely opposite to everything Dakota had endured there. She came at Tyler's invitation, carrying in her purse an envelope containing the DNA results and Nana's letter. She wasn't there to cause chaos. She came for her brother and for the truth. For the first hour, Gary deliberately ignored her presence. But when he took the microphone to give a speech, he chose to bring her into it. In front of relatives and friends, he proudly declared Tyler his only child, announcing that all his assets would go solely to his biological son. Then, without hesitation, he publicly denied Dakota, claiming she did not carry his blood. The entire garden fell into suffocating tension. Dakota rose to her feet. She did not scream. She did not cry. Calmly, she reached into her purse, pulled out the envelope, and held it high for everyone to see. In a steady voice, she read the DNA results aloud. Each number rang clearly, confirming an almost absolute probability of paternity. The air seemed to freeze. Gary's face drained of color, yet he still tried to deny it, dismissing it as a staged fabrication. Dakota then unfolded her grandmother's letter. She read aloud the two most crucial lines, confirming that Gary had been unfaithful while Marlene was pregnant, and that Nana had hidden the truth for decades. A wave of murmurs spread across the yard. All eyes turned toward Gary, waiting for an explanation, but he remained silent. The moment Tyler looked at him and asked, "Is it true, Dad?" marked the end of everything. Gary did not answer. That silence was the clearest confession of all. Dakota placed the two documents on the table and walked away from the party, leaving behind a father stripped of his pride and a lie exposed under bright lights. The truth did not crash down like a violent storm. It spread slowly, piece by piece, but it was powerful enough to tear down a wall of deception built over 30 years. Within weeks of the party, cracks began to appear in Gary's life. 3 longtime plumbers from his team resigned one after another. Major contracts were canceled due to lack of staff. Longtime clients hesitated to continue working with him, and neighbors avoided his gaze whenever they passed him on the street. At church, Gary was no longer asked to lead prayers as he once had. Another woman now stood at the pulpit in his place. That small change became a heavy blow to the reputation he had carefully built for years. He was no longer seen as the model man of the community. The warm handshakes disappeared, replaced by distant nods or worse, cold silence. Tyler, too, no longer looked at his father with the same admiration. For the first time, he began questioning his childhood memories and realized that throughout those years, there had been a sister quietly enduring pain in the background. The distance between father and son grew wider each day, while the bond between Tyler and Dakota slowly began to heal. As for Dakota, she felt no triumph, no satisfaction. What she felt instead was a slow, steady lightness filling her chest. Not because Gary was facing consequences, but because her mother's honor had finally been restored. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need an inheritance. She didn't need a belated apology. the only thing she had ever truly needed. She now had the truth and the freedom to move forward without carrying the weight of a lie. After the truth came to light, Dakota's life slowly turned to a new chapter. The recurring nightmares faded. The invisible guilt that had once clung to her mind began to loosen its grip. She learned to let go of resentment, not to forgive Gary, but to free herself. Healing did not arrive overnight, yet little by little, she felt her heart growing lighter. Dakota continued her work in the pediatric ward at St. Francis Hospital, where every day she witnessed fragile young lives fighting bravely to survive. Those children reminded her that while people may be vulnerable, their resilience can be limitless. Every smile, every tiny hand that reached for hers, strengthened her belief that life, no matter how harsh it had once been, still makes room for love. Her relationship with Tyler gradually began to mend. The hesitant phone calls at first turned into a weekly routine. Tyler learned how to listen, and Dakota learned how to open her heart. When Jenny became pregnant, Dakota was the first person Tyler called. The moment she held her newborn niece in her arms, tears quietly streamed down her face. The baby was named Marlene, a name Dakota had never stopped whispering silently in her heart. Through it all, Ray remained her steady anchor, just as he had been from the beginning. Simple lunches at the repair shop, quiet drives without the need for words, small, knowing nods. These became the foundation of the new family Dakota built for herself. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real, and it was safe. Dakota came to understand that family is not simply where you are born, it is where you are chosen and where you are allowed to stay. Sometimes, the most painful broken pieces are exactly what lead us to the strongest and most whole version of ourselves. Now, she finds fulfillment in her work as a pediatric nurse, where she is reminded every day to cherish life in its most fragile forms. She maintains a close, loving relationship with Tyler and has become a devoted aunt to little Marlene, the child named after their late mother, a symbol of a new beginning for the family. Dakota has learned that setting boundaries is not an act of revenge, but the first time she truly chose herself. She proudly says she is someone's daughter, but not the daughter of the man who cast her aside. She is the daughter of the one who sheltered her, believed in her, and stood by her until the very end. Dakota Ashford grew up in a house where love was always in short supply. When her mother, Marlene, was still alive, she was the only wall standing between Dakota and her father's coldness. Marlene gently shielded her daughter, softening his sharp words and changing the subject whenever the atmosphere grew heavy. Because of her, Dakota could still feel a trace of warmth